And now we're very happy to bring to the stage Melissa Tate, who is an assistant district attorney, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what that work is like.
Thank you for having me here. Dave Ellison was a public defender who I've worked with for a couple years. He's recently left, but he sort of roped me into this. And I'm glad that he at least thought I was reasonable enough to come and be involved and to share in this conversation, because it is important. One of my pet peeves is people who just read off of slides, so I promise I won't do that, but I do have a couple to go through. I wanted to show this. This is in Massachusetts. This is a statistic from a few years ago which shows the pay scales in any district court. And you can see that we have the judges, who obviously should be at the top, and then at the bottom we see the assistant district attorney. And I'm not telling you this to complain about it, but I think I'm telling it to you for two reasons. One, I think it's really important that you have people who love their job, who want to make a difference, who know their community. Because, for instance, in Attleboro, and Dave can attest this, when Deborah, we won't use her last name, gets arrested, and she's a mentally ill homeless woman for going into a Dunkin' Donuts and causing a scene and is in custody, somebody who's not familiar with their community doesn't know that. And they may leave her there, they may ask for bail on her. Likewise, in New Bedford District Court, if Carlos, the local town drunk, gets arrested for doing something, and he has a 35-page rap sheet, I walked into court and found that he was a question of bail, and I said, no, Carlos will tell you if he wants you to ask for bail, because he's homeless, and it's usually only in the winter months. So he will tell you, and otherwise, we just let him go because he's not violent. So I think it's important that we keep district attorneys who know this stuff, but as you can see, typically the shelf life of an assistant district attorney in Massachusetts is 2 years. 2 years, get your experience, and then you go into Providence, into Boston, into a civil litigation firm, and you make a lot more money. And mostly because we do get a lot of trial experience, so we are a hot commodity. So I tell you that for that reason, but I also tell you too because the people who stick it out, who are there, are usually there because they want to be there. They're there because they care about their communities, they want to make a difference, and often, just like I'm sure all of you feel, don't really know a lot of the right answers to some of the questions that are going to be asked tonight, but we want to try to make some sort of difference. So that's why I'm not to ask you to write your legislators to give us more money or anything like that, but just to let you see that there is a very big disproportionate thing in the salary and the value of the work that goes into prosecution. And you only get what you pay for, really. And so if you are paying people crap money, you're going to have crap prosecutors. And that's just a fact. So that's what I'm showing that for. And one of my sort of themes throughout this is kind of the idea of having people who understand their community, because I think that's the most important thing. So this is the day in the life of any typical assistant district attorney. I walk into my office every morning, and that is what I have to deal with for the day. One day, all of these cases. And this is actually a light day. If I see this, I'm like, okay, we don't have that much to do. So oftentimes, it's really hard to remember that each one of these files is a person. Each one of these files may have a victim associated with it. Each one of these files may have someone who's drug addicted, may have somebody who is mentally ill. And oftentimes we are just shoveling water out of the boat, just trying to stay afloat. So for prosecutors who have been doing it for a long time, we always have to try to remember to tell, and I've been doing this for about 9 years, which is kind of scary for me to say that, but you always have to try to remember that each one of these people, each one of these files does represent an important person, and we have to be able to take the time and put in the resources to really pay attention to that, even though you can see some of them are thicker than others. We typically, just to try to make our life easier, we have yellow files. Those yellow files signify a sexual assault. So that's a sexual assault crime. We have blue files, which are domestic violence files, and then we have gray files that are gun files. And all like the tan ones, that's just everything else. So it really does take someone who can multitask and get going to try to really stay and do this. And you're on your feet all day long, and you have lines of attorneys who want to come and talk to you about their cases. So here's sort of the big question. I don't ever send anybody to jail. I recommend sending someone to jail, and the judge is ultimately making the decision. But the question is, when do you ask for it? And these are just some things from me. I think that every prosecutor may have their own different idea, but one of the most important things are the facts of the case. And really, I should say, instead of victim-based, non-victim-based, violent crime versus non-violent crime. because typically that's what's going to be the big difference for me personally. I'm the supervisor of Attleboro District Court, so I handle all the sexual assault cases. So when I say victim-based crime for me, typically I'm dealing with someone who's between the ages of 8 and 12 who have been sexually assaulted by someone. So typically for me, those cases, I'm probably going to ask for jail time. But we also want to look at the defendant's history with the court, have they served and committed time before, and all these different things, and try to come up with some sort of recommendation for the judge. And it's not an easy thing to do. You have people who have tons of entries on their board of probation records or their records, and some of the things are the stupidest things you would ever see, and you don't want to ever recommend someone for shoplifting or different things like that. So you really do have to try to take into all different sort of things. And I'm sure that every prosecutor would stand up here and tell you a different thing that they would consider when they were trying to determine whether or not they were going to recommend someone to be incarcerated. But those are just a couple that, at least for me personally. One of the big ones is whether or not the defendant has violated the terms and conditions of his probation. So oftentimes we have people who are on probation for a long amount of time, and there are tons of conditions, and oftentimes we're setting someone up for failure. I had someone last week who came up to me and said that his client wanted to do 2.5 years, suspended for 2.5 years, and he had a terrible record. And I said, why doesn't he just go in for 2 weeks and just get it done and not have all this afterwards? And that guy actually wanted to do that instead, because along with being on probation, a big problem that we have is probation service fees. Everybody who is on probation in Massachusetts pays either $65 per month or $50 per month, just for being on probation. That doesn't have anything to do with any other fees or anything else you have. And if you do not pay that money, that is a violation of your probation, and you then can end up incarcerated because of it. So if you're thinking about places like Pawtucket or New Bedford or Fall River, most of the people there are very low income. So these probation service fees, they just rack up, and it just becomes a terrible, vicious cycle over and over again. So this is an example of somebody's criminal record. And I include this, I took all the personal information off, but I included this because oftentimes when we are determining what we're going to recommend on a sentence, we know nothing about the individual. And this is really all we have to go on. That and the facts, which I have right here. We can go back and forth on them. But that and a police report that just has a couple paragraphs as well as a record. And so they ask us to make a recommendation on their case. And then sometimes the defense attorney will get up and they'll have this 10-minute argument about all these wonderful things. I said, why don't I know this? Like, I'm just looking at this. How is it possible that I am supposed to be making a recommendation on a one-page police report and someone's criminal record? Now, this was a case where this defendant was shoplifting. And as you can see, you look at this and he's already served 90 days committed time and violations of probation. So the question is, do you ask for committed time again for shoplifting? My answer is usually no, because I don't do that. He ended up not being incarcerated. We didn't recommend that. But it's just to show you a little bit that we really don't have a lot to go on when we're doing it. And so we depend on people in the court to tell us different things about their clients, because I want to know. I want to be able to find ways, because contrary to popular belief, I don't think any of us like to send someone to jail. It's not, oftentimes when you're in a community for a long time, you know these people who are the frequent flyers in your court, and you've set them up with services and you've done conditions on them, and so when they violate, it really is upsetting to see someone actually have to go into the House of Corrections at some point. So I think that all goes back to the importance of having prosecutors who know their community and who are involved in their community. And again, that's a difficult thing given sort of the high turnaround that we have there. Let's see, is this the right way? Oops, that's the wrong way, sorry. So I wanted to kind of go over some of the options that we have and some of the different things that we can do. So I'm going to start kind of backwards, but the OCC level 3. So in about the 80s and the 90s, I think that the incarceration rate in Massachusetts went up by about 200%. And so the legislature tried to figure out ways on how we can change that. What are we going to be able to do? So they did develop this OCC level 3 or OCC different levels which basically probably look and feel like being incarcerated because they have to check in every single day, go to drug counseling, learn life skills, education, different sort of trying to find job skills. And it is really an intense program. I believe it's, for us, it's in Taunton, Massachusetts. And it's a lot. And that's also considering that someone has to have a driver's license, which is another problem that we have. So it's a lot, and it's asking a lot. For somebody to get OCC level 3, they have to have a pretty long history with the court, and this is sort of like your last chance before we're going in. But then we go on with probation with conditions. So in Massachusetts, we have different types and different levels of probation. We have what's called pretrial probation, which does not give someone a record, which is one of the most important things. It's a very powerful tool to be able to sort of mold behavior without actually having someone given a criminal record. So someone is 19 and they maybe have a record in the juvenile court, and this is their first time. We can typically do a pretrial probation, and then it's sort of sticking in a filing cabinet for a period of time. If they have no further difficulty, the case is dismissed off of their record. Then we go into a little bit higher than that. We have continuations without a finding, which basically means that it is a conviction, but it is ultimately dismissed at the end of that period of time where someone actually has to admit to it. With pretrial probation, you don't have to admit to anything. You're just basically making an agreement with the prosecutor that you're not going to have any further difficulty with the law. And then we go up, like I said, it goes up a notch to continuations without a finding, which is essentially less than a guilty, and it also sort of looks and feels more like real probation. Again, probation service fees that are stacking up at that time. You can also do conditions along with that. Then we have our guilty convictions, which I don't think I really need to explain that. And then after that, we also have suspended sentences, as well as then committed time. So we also try to do and being creative with different things. Lives Through Literature is a program that's run at UMass, Dartmouth, where people who have really tough records typically get sort of a diversion type of program, but it's a condition of their probation where they can go, and it essentially looks like a college class where they get a reading assignment each week and they read. And one of the really interesting things is that a lot of these people have a very low recidivism rate afterwards. They did some interviews with some of the individuals who were at Changing Lives Through Literature, and for them, they said it was sort of the first time ever that they were able to go into a classroom and have someone talk to them about what they were thinking and hearing what they had to think about the books. So I thought that was a really interesting sort of, and something when I was in New Bedford I used to always try to use a lot because I found that interesting. Mental health facilities, we can do inpatient, we can also do outpatient, but as a condition to continue on with their counseling. Oftentimes, a lot of the people that we are dealing with in district court are people who suffer from mental health issues, as well as people who suffer from drug addiction. So that is sort of most of what we have. And oftentimes, the court sort of becomes the last resort because families have gotten sick of it. There's not really a lot of services. So here's like an interesting thing. So mental health issues. They can probably try to get with the Department of Mental Health to get help for those. But the Department of Mental Health will not get you services and get you into their system unless you have an address. And most of the people that we deal with mental health are homeless. So these people are on the streets, they are walking around, and they have no services whatsoever. They come into Attleboro District Court, and we ask them to be sectioned so that they can go at least to a state hospital and try to get, level out. They are usually there for probably 72 hours, and then they are discharged, and that is it. So if you think, so what can we do? I don't, like I said, I don't really know the answer to that, but it's very, very discouraging to see some of the things that happen. Same thing with drug abuse. Families can come in and they can ask for their children or any friends to be sectioned who are addicted to heroin, which we all see the news that that's running rampant. They can be sectioned, and typically we can sometimes, if they have a criminal charge, we can not ask for bail and have them go on their section. And typically within the next couple days, they are back out on the street. So it's really frustrating because trying to find the right answer, trying to find services, is very difficult considering most of the people that we're dealing with. And I did anger management in the Batterers program, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. So these are just some of the options that we have. It is important to try to get creative and to try to do different things, but some of the options that we have are somewhat limited. So one of the things that I think is important to know is that 90% of the cases that we deal with in district court are people who made bad decisions, people who made stupid decisions, people who just had a really bad day. 90% of those people are people that we need to get creative, we need to just try to get these people in and out. There's probably only about 10% of the people that we deal with that are bad guys and girls. But those are the people that we need to try to do targeted prosecution to make sure. So just some of the things that we do are serial batterers. Those are things that are on our radar. Some of the cases that we see are horrendous of domestic violence over and over and over again. And I don't need to tell anyone else here, but that when you see children in the home, domestic violence, it's a cycle. And it starts young, and if you see that, then that type of behavior is going to be continued. And the children are much more likely to be in the system themselves. So we try really hard to focus on serial batterers. Now that doesn't mean that we're going after every single couple that gets into a fight and gets into a scuffle. It means that we're going after these guys that punch their pregnant wives, that come after them, strangulation. It's just a new statute in Massachusetts where we finally got a strangulation statute. Illegal guns. Illegal guns on the streets, illegal loaded weapons. Those are things that we are going to ask to have someone held without bail, typically throughout the pendency. Because in larger cities like New Bedford, Fall River, the guns and the drugs, it's just dangerous. And it really is a balance of people feeling safe in their homes. So that's sort of a zero tolerance that we have in our office. Breaking and entering into the night with intent to commit a felony. Typically, I just put this up here because it's a little bit different. Doesn't necessarily mean they're definitely going to be someone that I would ask for someone to be incarcerated for, but it's a case that I'm going to look at, because a lot of our job is balancing what's the right thing to do for this person and what happened to the victim in the case, because we have to try to determine what is the right thing to do. And people do have the right to feel safe in their homes, so we have to try to figure out a way and what is the best thing. So it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to ask for someone to be incarcerated, but it's definitely going to be a case that I'm looking at, and I'm going to want to see some really positive changes before I'm willing to not do that. Sexual assault cases, I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Again, children's sexual assault cases are typically, and any age sexual assault cases, again, it's a balancing act. Typically you think that somebody molests an 8-year-old, they should go to jail. But then we have the decision of putting an 8-year-old on the stand and having to testify. So there's another balance. It's something that I'm actually trying to decide right now, whether either am I going to plea this person to no jail, or am I going to put an 11-year-old on the witness stand and have her testify? Because we have to try to think of the overall picture and what damage will we possibly do to this child. Now, the drug possession to distribute, I put red, distribute, because I do not know many prosecutors, actually that's not true, I know some prosecutors. I do not know a lot of prosecutors who would ask for someone to be incarcerated for drug possession. And as I said, in any job you have some people who are a little bit too gung-ho, but from the people that I know, typically the drug possession cases, we're looking to try to get services for somebody. We're not looking to incarcerate somebody who is addicted to heroin. We recognize that it is a really difficult thing, but typically for the most part, we're not going to be looking for any sort of jail time for that. Elder abuse is another thing that's sort of a new hot topic. We have elderly individuals who are being terrorized by family members. Their entire life savings are wiped out. We have one where someone was tied to a bed. So sort of our most vulnerable individuals, children, elderly, some of these people who are in very serious domestic violence relationships. Those are the people that we also are the voice for as well. So those are just some of the people, like that's one of the things we say is just hold the bad guys. Everything else you can figure it out, but the ones that 10% are the ones that we really try to focus and spend most of our resources on. Because if you see that big giant file, I don't have time to try to go after every single person, nor do I even have an interest to. And then finally, I included this because oftentimes I think that the conversation about mass incarceration is extremely important, and like I said, I don't really know a lot of the answers, but I do think it's important that as prosecutors, we are the voice of victims as well. And you have to it is a balancing act. So I received this from an individual on a case I was prosecuting. It was a woman who had her eye socket broken and she was strangled, and I believe that she had her ear bitten, a part of her ear bitten. And when she was talking to me, she told me that she did not want to testify, that she was too afraid, and that he was in custody at the time. And she showed me this relationship manifesto that he gave her, and he told her to carry with her at all times. So if you go through, it says, and these are all just things, these are what he requires of her. So number one, what I say goes, period. Number two, don't bitch about it. Number three, don't ever look, associate, or talk to any other men unless specifically okayed by me. Example, my friends and such. Number four, never ever disrespect me or raise your voice to me in public ever, or at home for that matter. Number five, never ever disappear or not pick up the phone when I call. Number six, never make plans without consulting with me first. And number seven, never reject me for sex or love. So I just did that to kind of show some of the part of the victim, because we have some people who are really vulnerable, who are really in bad situations, and it is so important to make sure that the justice system works for them too. Because the justice system, especially in Massachusetts, is very defendant friendly, where they sort of control how long the case is open for. They have, and as they should, they have all these rights. But oftentimes, we are stuck explaining to victims why the case is going on, why the person is not in custody, why the person has violated their restraining orders 6 or 7 times and nothing is happening. So there is two sides to it, and I think it's important to recognize that. This was an individual who, at the time that she was with him, when she came in, her boyfriend was the number 2 in charge of the Latin Kings. So not only was she an individual who was in a gang, but she was also in a domestic violence relationship. So when she was trying to leave her gang, her boyfriend, she also had the issues of leaving the Latin Kings. So it was definitely, she actually has gone on, and she is starting, one of the things that she found was when she got out and she went to the Women's Center for help, most of the services were denied to her because she was a convicted felon. Which is heartbreaking, because someone who's trying to, and actually he was indicted and got a state prison time, but we believe he burned her house down as well. We couldn't prove it. So she was homeless with 2 children. So it's just these things you see sometimes are absolutely heartbreaking. She went on to actually get her CNA and is doing really well. And she's actually, she wrote a letter to the mayor of New Bedford regarding the fact of women who are getting out of these gang relationships in a large gang area. And she received a grant from the mayor's office to start trying to do a certain section of the Women's Center specifically targeting women in gangs. So it's actually really one of the few happy stories that I have, but it was really incredible to see, and I just wanted to share that with you because in the conversation I think it's important to talk about that balance. That's all I got.